welcome to the Pinnacle Mindset Chat Show. Tonight I'm your host. My name is Sophie, and I am the founding director of Mental Health and Sports CIC. And tonight we have a treat for all the rugby fans of the podcast. We have Steve Grainger on the show. So hi, Steve.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm amazing. How are you?
Good. All good, thank you. Well, pretty good, considering the current circumstances, I think.
Of course. Would you like to give us a little bit of a background as to who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Steve Grainger, the Rugby Development Director at the Rugby Football Union. So I've been there for just over 9 years now. Some days it feels like it's 9 minutes, and other days it feels like it's 99 years. My job there really involves the management of the sort of operational side and the development side of what we know as the community game. So basically everything that sits beneath the championship on the men's side of the game and beneath the P15s on the women's side. And that sort of encompasses all of our clubs, our schools, colleges, universities, adult rugby, as well as sort of age grade mini and junior rugby.
Wow, amazing. So you've got a pretty big role then. So in terms of the community, how important is the community in rugby? Because obviously it's a team game. It must be a huge deal to handle that.
Yeah, I mean, it's we call it the rugby family, particularly in the community game. And I think anyone that's involved in the sport would know and understand why that is. Our community clubs they're more than rugby clubs. They're sort of sites within the local community, yes, at which rugby is played, but also they're sort of major hubs for that local community for whether it's young people, adults, families, everybody sort of coming together, both on and off the field. A huge amount of lifelong friendships, lifelong relationships, and in times of crisis, clubs like that really come into their own, and we've certainly seen a lot of that over the last 6 months.
Yeah, of course, it must be massive, especially with COVID. So previously you used to, I did a little bit of research. I didn't stalk you, don't worry.
Always dangerous. Always dangerous.
So you used to work with the Youth Sport Trust.
That's right.
What made you change to rugby?
It's a great question. So I've always worked in sport. I've been lucky enough to work in a number of different roles. I was part of the team of 4 that started up the Youth Sport Trust back in, a long time ago now, back in 1995. Did a number of different roles there. And to be honest, it's like any organisation, I think, when you've been there a number of years, you start to think, well, what next? Is this me forever, or are there other opportunities out there? And for me, that was probably about 2009, 2010. So I've been there sort of 14 years, knocking on 15 years, and you just start to think, well, what else is going to be out there? What else would I like to do? I'd worked in local government. I'd worked in charities. I'd worked in what's now Sports Coach UK, the National Coaching Foundation. I've never worked in a national federation. And I think in sort of 2010, if you worked in sport, you were very excited about the 2012 Olympics and Paralympics coming. But you were also thinking from a sort of next step point of view, after 2012, there's going to be a lot of people that have migrated to work in sport because of the Olympics and Paralympics, and the job market's going to be a lot harder. So I'd sort of made the decision that it was time to start to move on. And then you start to say, well, where do I really want to be? And for me, if I was going to move into a federation, a governing body of sport, I really wanted to be in one of the bigger ones where I could test myself, I could learn some new skills, I could, get a bit of challenge. And for me, rugby would always be top of that list. It had been a really important part of my formative years. It's a sport that I had played, unfortunately, only until I was about 19 and had a bad neck injury. But, after that, it was still in my blood. It's always there. And I was just really fortunate that the stars aligned and a job came up at the RFU in early 2011. Chief executive at the time was a guy called John Steele, who just moved from UK Sport, somebody that I knew that I could work with and that I'd welcome the opportunity to work with. Applied for the job and got it, and the rest has been history, really. So it was part of a conscious decision to want to move on, and then really the right role coming up at the right time.
That's amazing. So, I mean, I still think 2011 was like 2 years ago, but it wasn't. So since 2011, how has the sport changed in terms of in this country, but also in terms of the whole world?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I mean, if you look at if you look globally, 2011 was the New Zealand World Cup, so I'd only been there. I'd probably worked in the union for about 3 months when the New Zealand World Cup happened, and for those people that sort of remember it, it was pretty memorable for England, both on and off the field, for the wrong reasons. So. Lot of challenges off the field in terms of team cohesion, in terms of some, reports on player behaviour and a whole pile of other things, and then sort of crashing out in the quarterfinals. So it was, and that was my first insight really into what the sort of how the national team could impact on grassroots and on participation, and how important the national team is in a sporting environment. And of course, since then, we hosted the Rugby World Cup, the Men's Rugby World Cup in 2015. We'd won the Women's Rugby World Cup in 2014. So we started to see significant shift in the sport here. Again, on the field in 2015 in the Men's World Cup, really disappointing to go out in the pool stages, so one worse than New Zealand, really. Mm-hmm. And but we were on home ground. We were staging the tournament in this country, and that provided us with a great opportunity to take rugby to places it hadn't been seen in before, in terms of major events. And we were able to really drive some great sort of opportunities on the back of that. And then, of course, to go to the Japan World Cup last year and to make the final. Wasn't, again, a great final performance, but at least we got there. And again, for the women in 2017 to make another World Cup final. Again, it wasn't to be at the final. So I think in terms of performance, we've seen some significant shifts. I think more broadly off the field, what have I noticed has changed? The opening up of eyes to the fact that this is a sport that's not just the male 15-a-side game is arguably still the core of the game, and it's still where we generate the majority of our revenue to invest in the game. Yeah. But if I think back to 2011 when I joined, women's rugby was just not universally accepted by our sport. It was being played by a significant number of women, and there were some brilliant females leading the development of that sport, but it just wasn't in our DNA. 2014 World Cup win started to change that, and now I think it's transformational. There's still a way to go, there are still challenges, but it's much more integrated than it ever was. And I think the same would be true of non-contact rugby, other variants of the sport, which is just, again, responding to what's a very different demographic now, different people that want to play our sport, they want to consume it differently. So pretty significant change there, I think. And I mean, globally, you continue to see the major rugby nations sharing similar sorts of challenges around how we are still challenged by transitioning players out of age grade rugby and into adult rugby and retaining those numbers. But you've also seen globally significant growth in places like North America and across Asia, where there are a lot more people crudely just picking up and handling an oval ball rather than, in our context, kicking a round ball.
Yeah, that's incredible. I find it so incredible because I never knew that rugby could be played by girls. And it just absolutely blows my mind that I didn't even think that that was the case. So I find the whole thing fascinating, especially since I've just joined the Pinnacle Mindset show. My mind has really been opened up. But
Anyone can do anything.
well, yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing. I don't really know why I was so surprised, but the thing which I also find fascinating, just from trawling the RAFU website, is the mental health related approach that you guys have on your website. Now, not many governing bodies have actually got links to Mind and what are the other ones? Samaritans and people like that. Not many governing bodies have that. Why do you think that? One, why have you got that on there? But also, two, why do you think that not many governing bodies have that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of why we have it on there, there are probably two key reasons. You know, one is a really sad one, and one hopefully is how we take our responsibility seriously. So one is a fact that we're a sport that's enjoyed by a lot of men in their late teens and 20s and much older, of course. And increasingly over the last few years, unfortunately, we've had a significant number of those individuals who've had some serious mental health issues and in very sadly some cases that have resulted in suicides. And when that happens in a rugby, I mean, when that happens in any family or any community, that hits it hard. When it happens in a rugby club and a rugby community, it seems to hit doubly hard. And that's back to that family thing. Mm-hmm. And over the last couple of years, we then get our rugby clubs and our rugby family wanting us as a union to do something about that. You know, what's the union going to do? You know, we've got young men in our clubs that are committing suicide. And our take on that is, you know, they're not committing suicide and their mental health issues aren't caused by rugby. These are societal issues. And, you know, we are definitely not the right people to be helping. You know, we're a governing body of sport and we're sport development professionals or performance sport professionals. So we've taken the very conscious approach of partnering and signposting with the sorts of organisations that are experts and specialists in their field. And we believe it's those agencies that are best placed to help with this situation. And what has equally is very positive are the amount of brilliant stories where we do hear from young men and we do hear from clubs that, you know, it's a very sad statement, but, you know, if it wasn't for the rugby club, I wouldn't be here. And it's that genuine pulling together of a community that actually cares about you as a person. And that's really important to us as a sport.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I was when I signed up to do the show, I was fully anticipating there to be nothing on the website and to ask why. But then I found it on the website and I was amazed because so few governing bodies have like links to mental health services, and I was just amazed by it. So my hat fully goes off to you guys, and in a way I think you're probably leading the way with governing bodies. So in terms of it being a team game, do you think that has benefits or do you think that has negatives on people's mental health?
I think it's a massive positive. You know, I'm a big advocate of team sports and a dependency that you end up with on each other. So I can, you know, I'm a bit of a runner, and I could argue I could go out for a run and I'll get physical health benefits. I can go out for a run with a running group, or I can go to a race where I'm part of a team and I'll get physical and I'll get a bit of mental health benefit from that because I'm communicating and it's good. I think with a team sport, and arguably particularly with our team sport, where the dependency on other players is huge. So everybody's got a unique role that they play. And, you know, I won't give examples of other sports, but in many other sports, you can move positions much easier. They're not specialist positions. You know, in our sport, we need a front row at the front of a scrum, and not everybody can go and play in that position. So if you're a prop and you decide just not to turn up for a game, there's another 14 people can't play. Just can't. They won't get a proper game, or we'll have an uncontested scrum. And if we have that, there are another 15 people in those two scrums that can't practice the art, crudely, that they want to practice, and they're specialists out on the pitch. And I think there's something quite special about that, about being valued for the role that you play, whatever it is within that team. So I think it's important in team sport, full stop. But I think in a sport like ours, you've all got a very, very specialist role.
Yeah, that's amazing. I find team sports fascinating because I'm part of an individual sport, so I'm a swimmer. So I find it fascinating, the fact that how it must be in difference to a team sport. In terms of mental health, what are you guys doing to kind of keep moving forward with reducing mental illness in sport?
So I think a lot of it for us is about we as I said earlier, we're not mental health experts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a specialist skill and a specialist area. What we can do is make sure wherever possible that our coaches and people that are involved in clubs can recognise the signs. So training programs and signposting training programs to help people recognise that, and importantly help them not try to deal with things and solve things that they aren't equipped to do, but encouraging people to go and get the right level and the right sort of support. But the other piece is, I think, how do you not how do you prevent mental health, but how do you perhaps reduce the exposure to some of the things that might lead to it? So loneliness or low self-esteem or anything else that goes with that. So in and around our clubs, they're definitely not lonely places. There's a sort of saying that you can almost if you're involved in a rugby club, you'll find a rugby club wherever you go, and you'll get a really warm welcome. There's a perception in our sport that we're an exclusive sport because years ago we came from the independent school sector and we were only played by males, and it was largely white males, and a lot of that is true. You can't hide behind it. But actually, when you get into a rugby club environment, I'd argue it's the most inclusive environment that you'll ever be in. And the diversity of people in it, in terms of, walks of life and backgrounds and demographic is massive. And I think profiling that actually, I've been in a few live meetings the last few weeks with rugby clubs and in rugby clubs, and I would have challenged virtually anybody not to be at home and not to have found something in common in the room that they were in. And friendships are made for, it's a bit twee, isn't it, to say they're friendships for life, but they genuinely are friendships for life.
That's incredible. First of all, I want to comment on the fact that I love the fact that you've just said that you guys aren't sports psychologists, because so many times I say that sports governing bodies don't do enough, but then people are always like, oh, but they're not sports psychologists. I love the fact that you've acknowledged that, but you're still trying to go for more. But I also love the fact that you've acknowledged the preventative measures, I guess we can call them, in terms of mental illness. And I love that. So obviously COVID's been a tough time for everybody. Have you seen a change in the environment in rugby clubs, or has the general family's whole side of things just carried on as normal?
It's there's definitely been a change. There's a lot more hand sanitizer around, and there's a lot more face masks around, and there's a lot more stickers on the floor, all that sort of stuff. So I think clubs have really, really embraced their responsibilities. Have they many of them been a bit frightened of the responsibility that they're taking on? Yeah, it's a big decision to decide you're a volunteer and deciding to open your club back up. There's in the early stages there was some. Did you notice change? Yeah, because the end of the season was cut short. So, but the creativity in the clubs, how many virtual awards nights seem to take place over Zoom and Teams and Skype and everything else, and many clubs very quickly. People are used to going to a rugby club and volunteering and helping out. It's become part of their life. So actually getting stuck into helping out and volunteering in their own local communities became a natural way of doing things. So the number of stories we heard about people creating food banks in rugby clubs or delivering prescriptions to elderly people or housebound people, and taking food out, and even letting their club kitchen facilities out to somebody who was creating food for elderly people. Just that genuine community spirit has really, really come through. I think maybe one of the fears, if that's the right word, going forward is the other great thing about rugby clubs is they're intergenerational. So you'll go down on a Sunday morning and you'll see 76-year-olds with 6-year-olds.
Yeah.
And you've got that multi-layered generational issue. A lot of our volunteers are elderly because the club's become part of their life, and they still go down there. And I guess one of my fears is probably not too strong a word, but is that we lose a little bit of that.
Right.
That connectivity. We've got to, as well as getting our 6-year-old players to still go down, we've got to try and make sure we create an environment for our 76-year-old, or even in some cases 86-year-old volunteers to keep going down to the place that's become a central part of their life for the last 50 or 60 years.
That's absolutely amazing. I love the fact that it's just a whole community feel. And I guess that's probably what draws quite a lot of people to rugby, is that community feel. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think. I think if you've played rugby, there's a natural sort of thing to take your kids to play rugby, but actually those kids talking to other kids, and again, I'm not. You'd never sort of compare it necessarily to other sports, but the fact that the majority of rugby clubs have got a clubhouse, and they've got their own facilities, and if they haven't, they sort of create a virtual clubhouse without knowing they're doing it. There's something about even clubs that some of the clubs that play on local authority parks, that there's not a physical building there, but they seem to create the same sort of atmosphere, and it's definitely in years gone by has been a place that people would go to, and that's now what we are. We work very hard with our clubs to try and get them to modernise their facilities and to make sure that and that's a challenge for them because cash isn't out there to do those sorts of things in perhaps the ways that it used to be, but really improving their facilities and making them a place that people want to go to. Because if you're in rugby and you've been in rugby for years, you don't even notice the stains on the carpet on the floor, or the smell in the clubhouse, or the deep heat, or the curtains that are a bit torn at the edge. But if you're an 18, 19-year-old and you're making a decision about whether this is something you want to play, sort of place you want to spend the rest of your life in, you're probably comparing it to the bar down the road, or the coffee shop down the road, or the Virgin Active gym, or whatever it is that you go to. And it needs to have Wi-Fi. It needs to be a place that you feel comfortable in. And that's the trick. Often the older generation that have been involved for a long time just stop linking to that.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's amazing. Um, so would you say it's been difficult to support your athletes and coaches during this crazy time?
So far, no, because I think, of course, it's been difficult, but to be honest,
Yeah.
it's been relatively easy because they've supported themselves. Again, it's back to that. It's back to that community spirit
Yeah.
and self-support. I think it's going to get more challenging as the nights get darker and the weather gets worse, and we're still not back playing full contact rugby, which is what drives a lot of people in. I definitely don't underestimate the challenges that are in front of us. And I think supporting them to both get playing rugby, but also generally just supporting club members, club players, club officials, club volunteers through what's going to be a pretty challenging winter for us all.
Hmm.
Um, and the beacon of light at the end of that, the beacon of hope, really, is that the clubs have really got to grips with the virtual world,
Hmm.
and people that you would never have got on a Zoom call 7 months ago who are now setting Zoom calls up. Actually, they just have to work in that way.
Yeah, that's incredible. I agree that I think it's going to be a long winter. I think that people tend in this country, I think people tend to struggle more mentally in the winter. Um, just because of the whole lack of vitamin D from, I mean, we aren't blessed with very good weather here.
Yeah.
It's not like we're on a training camp 24/7. But I think that it's good that you're aware that that's coming. Um, so what are the kind of plans in place to combat that?
So at the moment, the biggest thing is to try and get back to some sort of meaningful rugby. So we've got rugby back up and running in a non-contact version of the game. We've got to a situation where at least clubs can go and play other clubs, because that's an important part of rugby as well. Coming together with another club and making competition, even if it's not the full format of the game. But really, our driver at the moment is to do as much as we can to keep our players safe and our volunteers safe,
Yeah.
but to get rugby played, and also to make sure our clubs can, and many of them are brilliant at it, but some do need support to bolt things down where they need to think differently about how they're running their club and operating their club and financing their club, because we will get out of this eventually, and at that point we need those clubs to be operational. We need those facilities to still be there and active in the local community. And from our point of view, we need those players coming back down to rugby clubs. It's easy for them at the moment to perhaps go off and do something different. And they're the future of the sport.
Yeah, for sure. It's probably a lot easier to just play a video game right now. Um, and
Yeah.
I think that it's so nice to hear that you're being so proactive about it. In regards to your coaches, what mental health first aid training support kind of awareness do they get?
So again, we recognise across the board that the vast majority of our coaches, 99.9% of them, are volunteers.
Yeah.
So again, we're very careful about what we insist they do, because they're their own motivators to come into rugby. They're giving up their own time.
Yeah.
So clearly they've all been through safeguarding training and they've all been through technical rugby training. What we then do is make sure that there's a good offering of courses, and that we signpost to courses, so that we're in a position where we can signpost them off to other providers that are offering particular courses. So nothing in that arena is compulsory.
Yeah.
But there are relationships with agencies and organisations that offer that. And again, often there are people in individual clubs who either work professionally in first aid or in mental health, and again, that's the strength of the club. There are
Yeah.
people who who bring that to the club. There are several schemes across the country that are locally funded by groups of clubs and by our constituent bodies, like our county associations, that are using the expertise that's in the game. And again, I guess this is another great thing. You can volunteer in the sport, not just if you're an accountant or a lawyer, or you know how to do pitch maintenance or catering, but there's all these different skill sets that people can bring.
Definitely, I think that's incredible. So before we wrap up, I have one more question. If you had, I mean, you can't have dinner parties right now, but if you had a virtual dinner party and you had the chance to invite 3 people, like they can be still alive, they can be dead, they can be whoever, who would you invite and why?
Oh God, that's a great question to end on, isn't it? When I haven't even thought about it. So the first person that I would love to have had around the dinner table would still have been Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
And why? I just have massive admiration for anybody that can, crudely lead a nation while they're still locked up in a prison cell on an island, whatever it is, 4 miles off Cape Town. I think how you show resilience and whatever you believe in, any cause, anybody that can do that and that can lead a nation out of what it came out of, I'd love to just get a few tricks as to why.
Yeah.
The second one would probably be my granddad, who sadly passed away when he was nearly 100, 3-4 years ago now. Because I think he'd just enjoy the crack, and he'd enjoy the conversation, and just because he came from pretty humble beginnings, so to hear and see some of the stories that I can now tell, and some of the individuals that I've met over time. And the third one, it's probably I think, who would the third one be? You know what? I think because I'd go for the Queen, just because I think if we're under absolute Chattermouse rules, I just think the things that she must have seen and heard and witnessed over the years, and some of the stories that she could tell, and maybe in real honest moments, some of the things that she wished she could have done that she wasn't allowed to do, or perhaps some of the things that she has actually done that she's never been able to tell anybody about.
Yeah, those are 3 really good people. I love that. And I hope that all of them would know how to use Zoom. If not, it might be a little bit of a problem. But thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. And please, to our listeners, please like, share, follow, do all of that stuff to hear more from us, and especially in the next coming weeks. But thank you so much, and I hope you all have an amazing day.